Thank you very much. Is this? Yep, you got me. It's great to be back. I can't believe it. It was 6 months ago I was last in this forum, so it's great to be back. Great to be hosted by TriNimbus. Thank you so much for coming. As mentioned, I want to talk about two things really. One was to kind of give you an update on what we've been doing here at AWS Canada, which is a relatively new organization. And then, given that you were all here to sort of understand a bit more about DevOps, I wanted to talk about a customer journey to DevOps and give you some benefits of the learnings that we had with that particular customer, and I think you might find it interesting. So, firstly, this is not quite true. We started in Canada in January 2015. So, whilst we had many customers, tens of thousands of customers already in Canada, the business was almost entirely supported by the US. So I joined in late 2015. We started hiring in January 2016 here in Canada, and we spent the last year and a half building out our Canadian operations. So now we have a lot of resources deployed across the country, helping great partners like TriNimbus, engaging with customers directly, supporting our customers with technical account management and professional services and solution architecture. All of those resources are now local, and so it's been a really exciting year for us. I know that to be true because we have our own landing page now for AWS Canada. Here we surface activities that we have underway here in Canada, and it's your gateway into Canadian events and things like that. We continue to grow our business here. So AWS continues to invest in Canada. We're continuing to hire across the country, so we have resources locally in the major markets here to support our customers and our partners. So it's been a super exciting year from that perspective. And the other big news, the last time I was here, I couldn't tell you when we were going to launch the AWS region, but I could tantalize that it had already been announced that we would be bringing in a region. And so as Jared mentioned, in December of last year, the 8th, we launched our Canadian region here in Canada. That was really born of a lot of feedback from existing or prospective Canadian customers that needed a Canadian region, either for regulatory, policy, sovereignty, or in some cases just emotional reasons. People wanted to be able to have their data in Canada, and so we have that now. And we've seen some tremendous adoption. You know, there are some industries which are very limited in their opportunities to take up cloud services without having the data locally. And so having the region here has been a really big step forward, and now we can say we are a legitimate AWS organization that can serve every size and type of customer here in Canada. Which brings me to some great customer stories. So again, prior to us really having Canadian resources on the ground, it was more difficult to surface the great Canadian examples in terms of Canadian companies who were taking advantage of AWS services here and what they were doing with those services, as well as, frankly, in some cases, subsidiaries of American companies doing great things here in Canada using AWS. And so this is just a snapshot of some of the brands that have been using AWS here. These represent every type of service. So some of these customers, they started with websites. The first thing they did was websites. Other customers in here, they started with big data. Some customers are going all in, like Porter Airlines, and running their entire business on AWS. Other customers are replatforming their SAP solutions onto AWS. So many, many different starting points. Increasingly now we see big data, AI, machine learnings. Those are starting points for many customers to augment their existing systems they have on-prem, because it opens up a huge array of new possibilities when you take the constraints of traditional sort of on-prem hardware, and you can start to talk about tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of CPUs applied to workloads at super low cost. So it's been a great year in terms of being able to start to surface these, and there are many more coming. There are many great customers in this room already. I know some of you are just about to start your journey, but a lot more stories that we'll be able to tell about Canadian customers taking advantage of cloud services here in our market. And then finally, the pace of innovation continues to increase. So over the course of 2016, we launched over 1,000 new services and features on the platform. And as was sort of indicated by Darren, a lot of that, again, is in response to feedback from customers. Many of these features are actually related to security, but there are some new services in here, some new services like the AI portfolio that was mentioned by Darren. So new services reacting to the opportunities in the marketplace, as well as new features. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how that is operationalized in our company in a second. But a great, exciting year for AWS. We're super pleased to be here. We're super pleased to be able to engage directly with many of our customers in their cities and to help you look at how you can take advantage of cloud services to solve your business challenges, to create innovation within organizations, and to spend your money in ways that actually add some business value as opposed to keeping the lights on. Because we were here to talk about DevOps, I thought I would give you some sort of insights into one particular company that has been on a journey to DevOps and been using DevOps for some time. This slide that you see here, this is a relatively old slide, but some of you may have seen it before. And it talks about the fact that the lifespan of companies on the S&P index has been shortening, and it continues to shorten. In fact, some of the companies on the right-hand side of this diagram are no longer in the S&P 500 even now. And if you want to know, what is the root of that? What is driving that? How are these companies replacing the brands of the past? How are they growing at these kind of rates and becoming so important on the S&P 500? We link it back to this theme. And this is probably a theme, again, you're seeing a lot of coverage about the new currency of growth in any business is innovation. How do we innovate more quickly? And some great examples of traditional businesses being disrupted by new players. And so this is just some of them. These organizations here have gone from being very small to being profound brands and significantly valued organizations. They've been powered by technology, and that technology has enabled them to do some different things in the market in terms of completely new business models, different ways of making money, and the rate of innovation that these have been able to drive, they've been able to accelerate away from their, what would be called the traditional competitors. There is another company that you will be familiar with that I thought I'd talk about today, because many of you might not be familiar with the journey that they have been on for some time, and that is Amazon. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about Amazon. Amazon, I think, there's no dispute that it's innovative. It's a company that has disrupted many markets. It's a company that continues to innovate. I'm going to talk about the retail side of the business, which is a customer of AWS. So Amazon runs on the AWS platform. They're one of the key customers to Amazon. They contribute in terms of how we innovate and how we get feedback from them. As Darren indicated, they take full advantage of the platform. But a lot of that innovation that they drive, of course, is then made available through the platform to any other customer to use anywhere around the world. This slide here, every year, Jeff Bezos writes a letter to the shareholders of Amazon. And this was some extracts I took from this year's letter. So the italicized portion of those are direct cuts from his letter. And then the bold is kind of my interpretation. The first one is this notion that the world is always changing. No matter what business you're in, the consumer expectation or the customer expectation you're trying to meet is being set by those who are doing it the best. So you know that. You know now if you go to a website and you've already given them your details and you have to give them your details again, that somehow seems wrong, because the best in class, they never make you do that. When you've enabled an application to know your location, which you've volunteered, then when you come across an application that you know could benefit from that but doesn't allow you to do that, it becomes clear to you. That consumer expectation is also setting expectation in business of things that companies should know when they're in a B2B relationship. So this notion that is always advancing, it's not changing. In AWS and Amazon, we call that customer obsession, really being obsessed with what can we do to improve the customer experience and knowing that it's not a static thing. You satisfied them today, but tomorrow they've got a new expectation, they've got a new requirement. How do we solve for that? How do we keep really focused on how can we do our best work for a customer every single day? And many of you who've used Amazon, I'm sure, have found when something went wrong, that's when they became even more important to you, because something broke in transit, but you found that the experience of getting that repaired or replaced was just really a great experience with Amazon, and that's unique, different to perhaps other retailers you've used. This focus on the outcome, so again, very common in enterprises that the process becomes the thing, and people sort of lose track of what was the thing supposed to do. So again, in this letter, Jeff sort of highlights the fact that we really want to focus on the outcome, not the process, and be prepared to challenge the existing process in order to achieve an outcome or a better outcome. Not fighting the future. How many times, have you seen, you know in your own organizations what's coming, but trying to repivot an organization to do things differently, it's really hard. And I see that a lot in different organizations. And we know that it either requires great top-down leadership from the C-level that says, look, there's just a different way, and I'm going to drive it through my organization, I'm going to make it happen, or great inspirational leadership coming from the bottom up of someone that really champions a cause, a new way of doing something. But in order to make these changes, you need to have champions within the organization that are empowered to do things. And so that's something that within the Amazon organization, we really try and create a culture that enables that. So anybody can basically highlight the fact that there's a better way. The whole organization is empowered to think about how we might do things differently, and there's a huge empathy within the organization to respond to that and find ways of making sure that we can do that. And then finally, this making quick decisions. Increasingly, being able to make decisions, move things more quickly. I spend a lot of time with many C-levels in Canada who say, actually, Eric, it's not about spending less money. I'm happy to spend the same percentage of my revenue on IT infrastructure, on technology. I'm trying to get more out of it. And by more, I mean more impact, more applications, more service, more things out of the money I'm spending. And I need to be able to move more quickly. And that more quickly has a few different dimensions to it. Now, interestingly enough, what you might know is that back in '99, Amazon was a monolith. The application was a very traditional waterfall, large-scale, single application that was developed and built in a traditional way back in '99. It was apparent to Jeff that that was just not going to scale. That wasn't going to be able to meet the needs of the organization and the opportunity that he saw ahead of the organization. And so he challenged the organization through a memo. And the original memo is no longer, it doesn't appear to be available on the internet, but the sort of paraphrasing of his memo is here for you to take a look at. So this was back in 2002, and I think it's probably fair to say we weren't really using DevOps, and that language was not really there in 2002. DevSecOps was certainly not there, or even SecDevOps. But you can see, if you look at the components of his memo, you can see the essence of DevOps in here. So everyone will expose their data through service interfaces, so this microservices environment where the interfaces between the apps will be through services APIs that you publish. They will only communicate through that mechanism. It doesn't matter what technology they use, and this might interest you when I get into some slides further in. It doesn't matter what technology you use, because again, within that development environment, people are used to using different tools, they're used to using different code bases with different languages. That's not the essence of what we're trying to solve for here. We want the speed. So if you know how to use Java, hey, Java's fine. And all of those services without exception must be designed to be extensible. This turns out to be a really profound set of requirements. And the bit that's missing from this memo, and he said, if you don't like it, then you're in the wrong place. This is how we're going to do things from now on. This is how we're going to write software. And this is how we're going to build our applications that will support the Amazon business as it grows. And so this, back in 2002, was the catalyst, in this case, a top-down focus on evolving the way that Amazon wrote software to support its business. And I'm going to sort of unpack this a little bit for you and then share with you some learnings from that we often share with other customers who are looking to sort of make this transition. The first is, we really see DevOps as a culture, and I'll talk a lot more about that. It's about customer obsession. It's about speed. It's about how do we do things quicker, faster, better, using the resources we have. DevOps is, those of you that are protectionists, it's about accountability for the code you write and how it gets run and what happens when it breaks. And then it's really about speed, how quickly we can get things done, make decisions, try things, trial and error, move changes through the system. At DevOps, there are sort of three pieces to this. At Amazon, we call them cultural philosophy, the practices, and the tools. I'm going to just sort of drill down on each of these a little bit. The first one is very deliberately, that first thing does not say people. It says cultural philosophy, because at Amazon, that's what it starts with. It's really DevOps as a culture, not just about the people. The people are an important part of that, and of course, the training and the tools and the processes that they use, but really, culture is the big component of how we think about how we write software. How many people are doing DevOps already? How many people work in large enterprise? How many people have moved to a CI/CD pipeline? How many people using infrastructure as code? So you see, the numbers get smaller. In this environment, it's all of those things. So the example we had earlier of, when we hire a developer at Amazon, they never see a server. They wouldn't know what it looked like. No one sees physical gear. It's all about interacting with software and then owning the software that they write and the impact of that software on consumers and on each other, because they write pieces of code that interact with each other through these APIs. So I'm going to sort of drill down into these just a little bit in each area. So this first one is something that you may have heard associated with Amazon, this idea of the two-pizza team. Anybody heard that? So the two-pizza team, the philosophy being that if a team gets beyond the size that you can feed it with two pizzas, it's too big. And so when a team gets beyond that, then that will be broken into two. So the service teams stay small. In fact, those service teams, they scale and grow, but they don't get bigger than you can be fed with two pizzas. And so it may have 8 developers to start with, and then once it's in production, it may slim down to 4 developers, and then if it's going to go through some big evolution or some new requirement, then it might scale up again to 8. But it doesn't get beyond that. Small teams, highly empowered. Those teams typically are writing the software. Of course, they're owning the software. You build it, you run it. That is a profound piece of the way that the culture is operationalized. The developers work together so that they're not always on call, of course, within that team. That responsibility shifts, but they own and run every service that gets deployed into the Amazon environment. They support their service, and they're responsible for tracking their goals and business metrics as their requirement. And we use a very agile methodology to do that within the organization itself, and often with customers, we'll share that how we do that, so people can come and see it and sort of in action. There's lots of learnings that Amazon has been on, because it's been doing this thing for a long time. So back from 2002, so there's been a lot of evolution in terms of what's optimal in that DevOps culture. So we've learned a lot there. From an AWS perspective, we have a lot of ex-Amazon people that work in my team here, including some very senior leaders from that organization, and they're very happy to kind of share what they learned on their journey of doing DevOps at Amazon. So this culture is an important part. For those of you who are trying to make the transition, it's really hard to make this transition, particularly in enterprise, where historically the responsibilities have been divided with very hard lines between the people that write the applications and the people that run the applications. Making that transition to put those two things together is a non-trivial exercise. And something that needs to be really focused on to make it effective. It's not something that happens overnight. There's a lot of skills transfer, there's a lot of learning, there's a lot of change of how to think about operationalizing that's important in making that transition. The second part is the practices that get used. Again, you might be surprised to know that there's no one standard here for us. So we allow those teams to optimize based on the experience of the teams, what's most appropriate to the thing that they're writing or working on. There's no centralized change management board. If you were to walk the floors, you'd find many different sort of artifacts that live in the offices that support the processes that the teams have chosen to use to kind of drive their software production and their delivery. But there is a framework of governance that lives around these teams that operate within our environment. But there's, again, a huge amount of empowerment to own the process and to drive to a set of outcomes driven by the need to basically, of course, meet deadlines, interact with other teams. Because the services themselves are all API driven, all of that is published. So the capabilities of an individual service are published so people can subscribe to them. If there's a delta in terms of what you need to consume from a service, you pass on that demand to the provider of that service. And so there's a lot of interactions that goes between teams as they seek to move the whole environment forward. The tooling is also really interesting. So a huge amount of automation exists within the Amazon environment, as you can imagine. So everything that can be automated is automated. Building infrastructure, deploying, testing, everything that can be automated is automated. Many of the tools that are available in AWS that manage things like your pipeline and the automation, those tools were born in the sort of Amazon environment and then ultimately productized to take out to other customers. And then you can see here, there's over 50 languages which are in use in Amazon also. So it's not sort of defined to a really small number of languages. There's a huge amount of languages in use, a huge amount of freedom to developers to pick the right environment, to write their applications and deploy them. But there's also a lot of structure. So job zero at Amazon is security. We deal with many, many millions of customers' credit cards and details, and so security is job zero. So within this environment, there is a construct, a set of guardrails and capabilities that and make sure that we can really focus on ensuring that the whole environment is secure. The tools themselves that these teams use are maintained by two pizza teams. So again, the requirements that they have to iterate the tools that support the people that are writing software that goes into the environment itself, those tools, two pizza teams again. Ingesting requirements, evolving their software at a really fast rate, and then deploying those capabilities for the rest of the developers to use. So it's the combination of these three areas that have really enabled Amazon to build a highly innovative, low-cost, highly productive environment for writing and deploying services into the Amazon environment. And I mean fast and big. This stat is actually from 2014, over 50 million deploys in 2014. So the scale of this, thousands of developers, thousands of microservices, continuous delivery across many, many different environments. Of course, staging and beta and testing and sandboxes and many other capabilities. So this DevOps has been a really core component of what has made Amazon available to move as quickly as it does and also to innovate at the rate it's been innovating. And you see that manifest itself in AWS. So every year that Amazon Web Services has been in production, you've seen the number of features and services go up every year relative to the previous year. That's because all of these practices that we have here, that we're showing you with Amazon, they apply in the AWS world also. And so AWS employs all of these practices, which is why you see such a high rate of production of new services into the environment based on the feedback that we get from our customers. This black blob is Amazon. This is a snapshot, all of the microservices in Amazon, highly decoupled environment, just sort of loosely coupled. What we've learned is that when they're loosely coupled, we can build more fault tolerance, we can limit the dependencies, and the faster we can innovate because we can add pieces to that environment, we can iterate components of the environment very, very quickly. To give you another sort of view of that, is just sort of drilling into that picture. Every Amazon.com page consists of 200 to 300 microservices. So this really is microservices, DevOps, infrastructure as code at significant scale. So it shows you just what's possible. But this didn't happen overnight. This was a transformation which was catalyzed back in 2002 through that memo, and a cultural outlook and a set of tools and processes and a philosophy that's kind of driven it to something that now the whole organization is super proud of. And so I thought I would sort of share with you what we've learned through that journey, what Amazon and AWS learned through that. Firstly, it's probably fairly obvious, DevOps is everyone's job. You can't just sort of carve off over here and say, these guys are doing DevOps. It needs to be a cultural shift to say, look, doing this in this way and taking advantage of these benefits, that's everybody's job. And in some cases, I've seen many customers try and make this transition. Not everyone necessarily can make it through that. People will hang on to the sacred cows, the traditional ways of doing things, because it changes a lot. A lot of things change when you move to this kind of environment. And so not everyone can make that transition, but know that if you can't make that transition, the thing likely won't be effective. It's part of this sort of evolution is to make sure you've got an environment where people appreciate that. Lots of developers, they don't like operations. Anybody here? I just want to write it, I don't want to run it. And so, again, sort of philosophically, you have to embrace the whole. Building a successful application that can satisfy customers at the end of it, it's build and run and maintain, not just the build and throw it over the fence. And so it requires developers to think about the full continuum and be able to be willing to embrace that and how you can automate the code that does a lot of those operational processes. And then the other side of it is the ops part of it. Ops people hate developers. You throw that code over the fence and then I have to support your crappy code. And so same thing applies. This is about pushing those two things together. And increasingly now, I'd say in Amazon, the sec part of DevOps has always been an inherent part. I think because that wasn't always the case, this terminology of DevSecOps has been originated so that people can really reinforce that it's a critical component, and how you think about sort of embedding security into that environment is really important. Amazon, I'd say it's always been an intrinsic part, but DevSecOps allows you to kind of surface it with a bit more precision and think about how do you automate security, how do you build guardrails, how do you make sure you have the appropriate tooling to ensure security in there. But in this case, just talking about making sure that the operations people are prepared to kind of embrace and understand how the applications are developed and deployed. And then one of the key drivers, sort of back to the beginning of DevOps, is about speed. How quickly can we ingest these requirements, develop the software and deploy it? How quickly can we respond to incremental requirements? How quickly can we respond to changes in our customers' behavior, the market? How quickly can we respond to a bug? So really taking pride in the speed, and which is why we celebrate that. We celebrate at Amazon and AWS how quickly we can actually get things done. And it's a function of this culture and the two-pizza team and the responsibility and the accountability that's embedded in the way that we do things. And it makes it a really exciting place to work. I mean, as I sort of mentioned at the beginning, I've been in this industry for a long time. The thing that has most impressed me and most astounded me since being at AWS is the rate at which AWS can respond to customers' feedback and deliver services. I've never seen anything like it. And it's really a lot to do with this sort of philosophy and this approach. We have a fail fast and learn quick mindset. That's one of the things you get, both when you have cloud services available to you, and you can originate things quickly, you can stand things up, you can fail fast. And so we encourage that mindset. We encourage people to try things, to test things, to think about doing things differently, but also to know if it's not working, we can turn it off, we can shut it down, we can start again. And so it's an important component of this transition, and you need to create an environment where that's okay. Again, in large-scale traditional enterprises, and I've worked with many, some are in this room, that's really hard to do. So it takes work and effort to create an environment where people can fail, you can learn from those things, and you can move on. Fostering innovation and accountability. Again, it's easy to talk about innovation. I think someone was talking earlier about sort of separating out the innovation. That was the human question. One of the things that we find when you can take constraints away, there's a story about Barack Obama. I don't know if you ever noticed, I hadn't noticed and my wife pointed out, but he only ever wears white shirts. And one of the reasons for that, is so he didn't have to make a choice. His sort of view was he had a finite amount of capacity in his brain, and so he didn't have to make a choice about what shirt he wore in the morning, so he just wear white shirts. innovation, when you're spending cycles on trying to maintain or keep something going or operate it, it takes cycles away from thinking about what could you be doing differently. Or if you could take constraints away, where you know that trying to convince your company to buy 100,000 CPUs is kind of going to be really hard. I've got to write a business case, and then we have to buy the stuff, we have to rack and stack, and there's just no point even starting that conversation. Whereas if you could say, look, actually, you could spin that up in a heartbeat. You could try it at super low cost, and if it didn't work, you can just turn it off. And so changing this frame of reference of what's possible, we find when you take those constraints out, then there's a huge amount of creativity available in the IT resources and the business people you have within your organizations. And then they can originate things, you can try it, you can see if it works, and then you can grow from there. Open and honest sharing of lessons learned, I'd say, it's a big part of, those of you that are doing sort of agiles and scrums. It's a lot about the communications between people and talking about how things are going, learning the lessons as you go. Building trust across the organizational boundaries, particularly, again, in traditional organizations where you're trying to convince your security and compliance people that, honestly, doing it this way is going to be fine. Throwing out software every few minutes is going to be fine. You can't just tell them that. Those people need to be taken on that journey. And they have a very important job to do. And so building the trust across these boundaries is important. Again, we have found where if you get a group that splinters off and then tries to go and do something without embracing taking others with them, those things will get shut down, or they'll go wrong, and they'll set you back a huge amount of time, as opposed to just taking it head on, that we want this to be an eyes wide open journey. We're going to take security and compliance with us, and we're going to show them that doing it this way is actually much more secure, because we've got tooling, and we've got capabilities within the environment, and we've got processes and automation that actually give you a much higher chance that you're building secure code than not. And then the other part, which I think is a big part of the way that Amazon and AWS thinks, is like everything's a work in progress. This goes back to that Jeff Bezos shareholder letter. He's actually in an office building which is called Day One, because his idea, his philosophy is we have to find a way of always being day one. Because as soon as you transition to day two is just a slow and painful death. Day one is where you want to be. And to do that, you have to be able to understand what's happening in the market, respond to customer requirements, iterate very quickly, stay at day one. Don't get to day two where you start to just sit back and relax. And there's plenty of examples across the world of companies that did that, and they have a slow and painful death. That slow and painful death can take decades, but it's those companies that wake up every day wanting it to be day one and finding ways to think differently about how do we stay contemporary, how do we do new things, how do we move more quickly, how do we not get constrained by the old ways of doing things. And so that requires everyone acknowledges that our work is never done. It's a work in progress always, every day, because guess what? The businesses we work with, the consumers we work with, their expectations are changing every day. And so that's something that we work hard at AWS, and it's a lesson learned that I think every customer can benefit from. So with that, I don't know if I've got any time for questions. No. So thank you very much for your time. I'm also here all day. It's great to be here with TriNimbus. We're super excited to be on the ground. I'm spending a lot of time with customers now, and I'm looking forward to spending time with you this afternoon. So thank you for the time.